Okay, looks like I think everybody has joined. So has everybody answered your question on the poll? It's just a quick question we want to start off with. And then we have a second one there if everybody just wants to have a quick look at that. We're just seeing how many people have joined a webinar with us before. Okay, I think that's everything then. Thanks very much for doing that. I'm going to just close that down then. And I think quite a few of you have joined us before, which is great. And then we have some new people too. So I'm going to pop up the slides here and we are going to start talking about child nutrition. I'm a dietitian with the Celiac Society and I've been working in nutrition now for about 25 years. So I have 2 kids of my own. So there's an awful lot with child nutrition I'm well used to putting into practice in my own house. Hopefully then I will be able to share some of that with you. If you have any questions as we are going along, please pop them into the chat or into the Q&A and I will get to those at the end and we'll go from there. So what's the state of nutrition with children in Ireland? So we actually have some really, really good research around the nutrients that children in Ireland are eating. So even from toddlers right the way through till up to about age 12. So we know that for children, about 94% of children in Ireland are not meeting targets for vitamin D. And vitamin D is a particularly important nutrient for people with celiac disease. We know that 37% of children are not meeting targets for calcium. We know 20% are not meeting targets for iron. We know that things like saturated fat is a little higher than it should be. So these are all things that we just want to have a little bit of a nudge really with kids and just to give you a bit of information about the specific nutrients. And then what I will do then is talk about sort of portion sizes for kids, because I know for parents that can be a really, really confusing area. So we also know kids are eating more sugar than they should. Now, in fairness, that has fallen over the last 10 years. The amount of sugar that children is eating has actually gone down. We know fibre has gone up a little, but we could do with, we're still below targets with it. And we know that kind of children are eating about 3 servings of fruit and veg a day, which we'd also like to just nudge up a little bit if we can. So when we talk about children missing out on vitamin D, why are they missing out? So vitamin D is a key nutrient for building healthy bones, you know, for growth, all of that. And, you know, in theory, we are supposed to get all of our vitamin D from the sun. So in Ireland, obviously, we're not famous for our sunshine. So we kind of have 2 problems with the sun. One is that the sun that hits Ireland from October through to March is too weak for us to make any vitamin D. So even if it was sunny today and you went out for a walk because it's November, you're still not going to make any vitamin D. During the summer, then the sun is stronger, but we get a lot of cloud cover, we get a lot of rain. Kids should be wearing their sunscreen, which reduces vitamin D as well. So even during the summer, we still don't always get the amount that we need. Now, you can get vitamin D in foods like oily fish, so things like salmon, mackerel, and you'll get a little bit in eggs, but it can be very difficult to actually eat the amount. And as we saw there, 97% of children are absolutely not eating the amount of those foods that we need to get vitamin D. So there's a recommendation from the HSC now that all children aged 1 to 4 need a vitamin D supplement from sort of Halloween to St. Patrick's Day. So October through to March is going to be really important for vitamin D, and that's a supplement of 5 micrograms a day. To be honest, if children have celiac disease, they can have a little more difficulty absorbing vitamin D, so we do recommend a vitamin D supplement all year round for children with celiac disease. So what about iron? So we mentioned that about 20% of children are not eating enough iron. And this is a huge issue around energy levels, you know, for healthy blood, for carrying oxygen around the body. We also need iron for normal brain development in children. We need it for healthy immune system. And we hear all about vitamin C and immunity, but actually iron is part of your immune system as well. And kids just need it for good energy levels. So why are so many children missing out on iron? So the main problem with iron is that there's actually less iron in food than people sort of expect. And I often find people talking about certain foods as being high in iron when actually they're not, broccoli being a big one. So where do we get iron? So red meat is actually a really, really good source of iron. And people are often a bit nervous of red meat at the moment. For children, it's absolutely fine for them to get red meat, around 3 times a week. We talk about 30 grams of red meat for younger children. Older children will need a little bit more. But 3 times a week is absolutely safe. No problem for children to have that. What we don't want kids having a lot of is a lot of processed meat. So lots of ham, bacon, salami, sausages, those kind of meats. But if you're doing something like, a spaghetti bolognese or a shepherd's pie or a stew, and you have, beef in it, that's absolutely fine. There's no problem with that for kids. And it is just a fantastic place to pick up iron. It's not the only place to get iron. So poultry, things like chicken and turkey will give you some iron, but you've got to remember that all of the iron in chicken and turkey is in the legs. There's almost no iron in chicken breast. So it's one just to keep an eye on with that. You'd have to be eating, it's probably around 24 chicken breasts a day to get your iron. So chicken is really good for other things. It's a really good source of protein. It's a really good source of B12. But, from an iron point of view, if a child is, say, having chicken for dinner and it's chicken breast, you need to make sure there's something else on the plate that actually has the iron in it. Oil-rich fish will give you a little bit of iron, and shellfish can be quite a good source, especially mussels. If you have a child who'll eat mussels, they are a fantastic place to pick up iron. Mussels actually have more iron in them than beef, so they are brilliant. On the vegetable side, then, we have the green leafy vegetables. But the thing is, it's not every green vegetable. So this is where I think people get a bit confused. So there's sort of 3 green vegetables that actually have a decent amount of iron, and that is spinach, cabbage, and kale. And I think kale was kind of the big superfood there, 5 or 6 years ago. It's not as fashionable anymore, but still a brilliant source of iron. Now, it's a bit of a tough vegetable for kids to eat, but if you look up recipes on kale crisps, kids actually go for them. And they're really very easy to make because they kind of get very crunchy, but all the iron is still in there. Spinach is a good source of iron, and that can be really good into pasta dishes. If your kid will take a smoothie, actually iron goes really well into a fruit smoothie. And cabbage will give you some as well. As I said, broccoli is not a great source of iron. There's a tiny bit in it, but as sort of 100 grams of broccoli, so kind of a serving of broccoli, will actually give a child only 4% of the iron that they need in the day. And I do often talk to parents and they say, well, they eat broccoli at dinner, and I'm going, yeah, but they're missing 96% of the iron they need for the day then. So the broccoli is great, don't get me wrong. It's a brilliant vegetable. It's got lots of other nutrients in it, but if that's the only thing you're giving your child in terms of iron, not going to get it. Now, beans, barley, and lentils are also really good sources of iron. Obviously, if you're celiac, barley is out. And with beans and lentils, you do need to just check packaging that it doesn't say may contain gluten. So beans and lentils will be naturally gluten-free, but we are seeing in the last sort of year to 18 months more with kind of a may contain gluten on them. So just watch out for that for yourself. But things like even baked beans, but kidney beans, chickpeas, so vegetarian dishes based on these go brilliant into soups where you can kind of puree them down. And kids, if you have a fussy eater, they won't know they're in there. But even things like roasted chickpeas, again, we've recipes actually on the celiac website for that. And they're really easy to make. And again, kids actually like them. They're kind of like a crunchy snack that you might give them instead of things like crisps or popcorn or things like that. Crushed up seeds and nuts. They are a really good source of iron as well. So looking at things like crushed up almonds, pumpkin seeds, those kind of things that you can buy. Older children can actually eat the nuts and seeds. Younger children, obviously, we don't want them having the whole nuts, and that's why we talk about crushed seeds. Then you can throw them into yogurt, put them into a gluten-free porridge. Any of that is going to work well. Now, fortified foods in general are a good source of iron. The problem on a gluten-free diet is an awful lot of the breakfast cereals don't have the same fortification with iron that you'd see. So for those of you watching who aren't celiac, fortified breakfast cereals can be really good for iron. If you are celiac, it is more limited there. So you do need to make sure you're getting your iron from the green veg and the beans and lentils, the seeds, looking at the meat and things like that. And then eggs are going to be another great source of iron as well. Now, a child and an adult actually needs 2 to 3 servings a day from that list of foods. So that's, I think, what surprises most people when I talk about iron, because people are thinking, oh, a couple of times a week. But actually, some of those foods need to be coming in, at least 2 meals a day. So, if you were having chicken for dinner, can you have, lentils with it? If you're doing a chicken stew and you put a load of lentils into it, you'll add plenty of iron by doing that. So just sort of be thinking, have I matched up a bit of iron in here or somewhere in the day in terms of what people are eating? What about supplements? So sometimes when I talk about iron like this, parents think, oh, I better just give them a supplement. But actually, it's not a good idea just to sort of lash out supplements all the time. Now, the one place where we would generally recommend one is for younger children. They need about 7 milligrams of iron a day. And if you have a child who's kind of big for their age and they're a great eater and they're active, they eat plenty of foods, they tend to actually, they're the ones who do better with the iron. But if you have a smaller child, their stomach is smaller. So even though they might be older, like 5, 6, 7 or whatever, they might still be having trouble eating all the iron that they need. So for children in particular, younger children, 1 to 3-year-olds, we'd often talk about them maybe needing an iron supplement, 7 milligrams of iron, but only about 3 or 4 days a week, just to top that off. So if you have a small kind of child, you can get iron fortified toddler milks, they can work, or the iron supplement will work as well if you want to do that. What about fruit and veg? So we mentioned those as an issue, so that a lot of children are not getting sort of their 3 servings a day. Now, sometimes when we look at the sort of the 5-a-day servings, that, there's no 2-year-old going to eat all of those. And even sort of a 5 and 6-year-old could nearly struggle with that. So what you're looking at is not that they have the adult size of the fruit and veg, but that you're just trying to step it up sort of through the day, that they have even small servings of it. So what we would say is that we want kids to have some vegetables with their main meals. So they don't need huge servings when they're small. It's kind of when they're getting to sort of 8, 9, 10, 11 that you're going to start expanding out kind of the amounts of veg with it. But to have some vegetables with their main meals. So, it could be cucumber sticks at lunchtime and it could be carrots at dinner time. So just that they're coming in, and it's okay to give them 2 different ones. But then after that, to bring in a small piece of fruit through the day, half an apple for, smaller children, and just it's more, if you can kind of get it in a few times in over the day, that's going to work really well. And then older children and teenagers are going to need 5 to 7 servings of fruit and veg a day. What about calcium? So as we said, about 37% of children are not hitting targets for calcium. From a celiac point of view, particularly a problem, because osteoporosis is more common in people with celiac disease. Now, in fairness, if children are diagnosed kind of as children with celiac disease, we don't see a massive problem with bone health for them. It's usually in adults who are kind of late diagnosed that it could be an issue. But in saying that, we do need to make sure all kids, celiac or not, are getting the calcium that they need. So we need calcium for growth. So if kids don't get enough calcium, they end up a couple of inches shorter than kind of kids the same age, and they end up with lower bone density as well, which means that, even when they're in their 50s, they're still at higher risk of osteoporosis. So it's worth remembering that kids lay down sort of 90% of their bone density before they're 19 years old. Now, teenage years are the big age for that, but children as well, we want them getting plenty of calcium in. So the best place to go for calcium is your dairy. Your body really absorbs that calcium very well, and the protein that's in things like milk and yogurt actually really helps with bones as well. So we talk about 3 servings of dairy a day for children. Now, butter and cream don't count in here because they don't have any calcium in them, unfortunately. So we are talking about milk, yogurt, cheese. So about 200 mils of milk, so a glass of milk, or if they have, if the smaller children might drink 2 half glasses of milk a day, that'll give it to them. It could be milk that they put over breakfast cereal, make porridge with milk, things like that will bring it in. If kids like things like rice pudding, that's great as well for getting some milk into them. Yogurt is going to be fantastic. So about 100, most standard pots of yogurt are about 125, 150 mils, and that's really nice for yogurt. Obviously, smaller children, a little bit of a smaller amount. But as kids get older, yogurt is great, and you really don't need to worry about the bit of sugar in a yogurt. Unless you're giving them the caramel toffee, crisp crunch, chocolate sauce yogurt. The ordinary plain yogurt or fruit yogurt is absolutely fine. I hear a lot of scaremongering about sugar in yogurts. So I said, if you're not going for the dessert yogurts, your ordinary yogurts are fine, and actually they're brilliant for kids to get. And then from a cheese point of view, 30 grams of cheese. So actually it's about the size of 2 adult thumbs. So it's actually not a huge amount to get. And you're looking at cheeses like cheddar cheese because they're a little harder and they have a little bit more calcium in them than soft cheeses like sort of cottage cheese and things like that. What if your child doesn't take dairy? So with celiac disease, we do get some kids who are lactose intolerant. We do recommend lactose-free milk for kids who are lactose intolerant because it still has the calcium, it still has the protein. So that's kind of where we would go. Most children who are lactose intolerant can actually eat cheese, no problem, because cheese is actually quite low in lactose. Yogurt sort of sits in the middle. It has less lactose than milk, but more lactose than cheese. So some kids who are lactose intolerant can actually eat yogurt and it's okay. Others will find that they're still getting a bit bloating, maybe a bit crampy with yogurt. So it just depends on the child. If you have a child who's dairy allergic or is following a fully plant-based diet, the next best milk to take, so the plant-based milk to go for is a calcium fortified soya milk. And you need to make sure a lot of the plant-based milks, they don't naturally have much in the way of calcium. So if you're using plant-based milks for children or even for yourself, you need to read the labels carefully and make sure that you have calcium added into those, because that's going to be really, really important. The reason we go for soy milk over the others is because milk is still a big important place of protein for children and protein for growth and energy and so on. So a lot of the plant-based milks, particularly things like oat milk and things like that, actually are quite low in protein, whereas the soy milk is closer to the dairy for protein. So it's just really to watch all of that as well. We do, on advice from the Food Safety Authority, almond, coconut, oat and rice milk are not recommended for children. They're nutritionally inadequate even when they're fortified for children. So really, it's, if you can take the milk, the dairy milk at all, I would. There's a lot of myths and sort of, I find a lot of incorrect information out there about dairy. You know, it's absolutely fine for kids to take and for adults to take. I don't know if you've heard people talk about dairy even causing cancer, but when we actually look at the science on that, not only does dairy not cause cancer, it actually reduces risk of things like colon cancer, that people who drink cow's milk and eat cheese actually get less cancer compared to people who avoid them, which sounds a bit strange because, you know, if you go on social media, it's, you know, you've all the exaggerated stuff out there. So I would say for kids, we really do recommend the dairy. If not, the calcium fortified soy milk is the next thing, but they still need the 3 servings of that. So if they're on the soy milk, they need to be getting sort of 3 glasses of soy milk a day, or you can get sort of the soy yogurt type pots. And again, once they've calcium added, they might count as well. Now, it can be difficult to get the calcium into kids without the dairy. And, you know, even kids taking dairy, if they're not taking enough, can run into issues. So that's one just to really pay a bit of attention to with kids over the next while. So in terms of just looking at the nutrients, they're the big ones. So what else do we need to look at? So sort of habits and portion sizes. And as I said, portion size is the one that catches a lot of parents, and we just don't know, are we giving them enough? Are we giving them too much? And of course, every child is different. So how do we go along with it? So a couple of things with portion sizes is, you know, with large portions, you can actually have sort of 2 extremes with it. If you give a child that's a portion that's too big, sometimes the child is just overwhelmed and they just think, God, I'm just put off eating that. I couldn't even begin. On the other hand, you might get the child who just eats it anyway, and then they end up, you can run into an issue even with weight gain for them. So particularly if someone's fussy, a very big portion of food is a problem. And it's a bit of a waste of kind of food as well. So if you put out a big portion and a child, you know, isn't eating it, you know, you're throwing food in the bin, and we really want to think about food waste as well. So how do we actually get it right? So I want to have a look at kind of what, as parents, we might be eating ourselves, because we eat a lot with our eyes. And so we nearly look at food and go, well, that just couldn't possibly be enough, or that looks stingy, or it looks mean. And particularly when you see something like this, like a sort of a standard chocolate chip cookie is about 8 to 10 grams. It has around 40 calories. And like now and again for adults, that's fine. For kids, we'd still talk about, and I'll talk about treat foods in a minute and just limiting them. But we start to see, I see lots of kids getting given these giant cookies. And it's usually, you know, people go, oh, they'd love that. Of course, kid loves this giant cookie. But your giant cookie is nearly 10 times the size of an ordinary cookie. And most parents are thinking, well, it's one and it's a bit big, but it's grand. But, you know, parents who would never give their children 10 biscuits will actually quite often give them this giant cookie. And of course, particularly for small children, what that means is they're going to be absolutely stuffed full, and they're not going to be able to eat their healthier meals later on. And even the same with crisps. So 32-gram bag of crisps, so kind of a standard bag of crisps, around 170 calories. But if you fill that bowl, you're looking at 150 grams and 800 calories for that. And the problem as well is that, you know, if you had a bowl that size and you handed someone those few crisps in the bottom of it, they'd nearly be looking at you. And again, these are adult sizes. This is not even what I'm talking about for kids. So I think for ourselves, we need to be careful with how we look at kind of bigger portions, filling plates, filling bowls, the size of things. And actually that for most of us, the smaller sort of end of things is going to be correct. So what do kids need? So children do need about 3 meals a day. They need probably 2 snacks. Sometimes if you have a very, very, very active kid, they might need a 3rd, but that's kind of really what you're aiming for. Be really careful about grazing. Kids that are nibbling all day long, you really want to just hammer down, you know, 3 meals, 1 or 2 snacks, 3 if they're very active. But do use your child-sized plates, cups and bowls. Now, you don't necessarily need to go out and spend money on special kids stuff. Like, kids like it, plus if it's plastic and they drop it on the floor, it's not such a big deal. But, using kind of side plates for kids is fine. The smaller sizes of those. Look at breakfast bowls. A lot of them are absolutely huge compared to what, even for adults, I find most of the standard breakfast bowls we see now are just enormous. So for kids, it's good to have the smaller bowl because it's hard for you to give them too much if the bowl is small. But if they're getting an adult bowl, and I like that visually, we fill it to a certain level. And then, as I said, particularly with younger children, a small glass of milk is plenty till they're, even 5 or 6. And whereas the adult, you might have the full glass of milk. And I just want to pop up this kind of visual around some of the portion sizes. So I'm talking kind of quite young children here, but 30 grams of chicken is plenty. Whereas the recommended adult portion is up to about 75 grams. Now, I know most adults will end up having 120 grams, but it's unfortunately, that's what's recommended. But it's quite small. And again, as I said, for the kids, 2 small glasses of milk rather than 1 big full one all the time. For a young child, 2, 3, 4, 5, half a banana is plenty. And this is what I'm saying about when we're talking about 5 a day for kids. It doesn't have to be 5 full bananas, for example, for the day, but a half a banana for a small child, that's their serving. That's in kind of proportion with their body. Even half an apple, half a pear, 1 plum, a sliced up kiwi, something like that. Don't be thinking about trying to give them huge amounts. It's more just that they get a little. So kind of half a pit a pocket for a child up to maybe 4 or 5 is actually loads. 1 Weetabix, 1 adult, the adults might have 2. Obviously, we're not having that if we're celiac, so we look for some of the gluten-free versions for that, but still watch out for the size on it. And again, beans on toast, so your gluten-free beans, your gluten-free toast, but it's just an adult might have 2 slices, a child 1 is going to be plenty. And the same with the dinner. And the trouble is, if you kind of hand that dinner, in Ireland, we're like, that just looks mean, and you feel like they need more on the plate. They don't, it's plenty. So it's just to keep an eye on using those smaller plates and just that balance. So what about the treat foods? And this is the big bone of contention, I think, for a lot of parents. It's really difficult to limit treats for kids because these days they are everywhere. And I said, I've kids myself, and I just find, they go out to do a sporting event and there's a bar of chocolate handed out at the end, or they go anywhere and there's a lollipop and, all that. And you're just like, can we just stop handing out treats all the time? And it's not that you never give kids treats. The problem is that kids are eating more than they need. So they end up getting more saturated fat and more sugar. So it's a problem for teeth and all sorts of things. The other problem is that, particularly smaller children, they eat a treat. They're now not hungry for their main meal. And while a lot of kids, if you love vegetables, fantastic. If you're someone who can kind of take or leave vegetables, you probably need to be a bit hungry to eat them. And that's true for so many kids as well. If a child is not hungry when they get to their dinner, it's very difficult to get them to eat it. And it's very difficult, maybe often, to get them to do the vegetable side of things. And when I work with parents who have fussy eaters, I'd say 60% of the time, the kid who won't eat their dinner is just full from what they have eaten through the rest of the day. And the treats are a problem because if a child is eating a lot of treats, then they don't have room for the nutritious foods. And so it's the kids who are eating the more treats and things like that, they're having the lower iron, the lower vitamin D, the lower calcium, because it's taking up just room in terms of what they can eat in the day. So the bad news is that treats should be once or twice a week for children over the age of 5. And I know when I sometimes talk to people this, they're nearly shocked. But for a lot of us, obviously, I can't see you, so I don't know how old any of you are, but I'm in my 40s. And when I was growing up, like if you got a treat maybe once a week on a Sunday, and I wasn't special or unique in my house, like all my friends would be the same. And when you talk to people, same thing, there was a treat on a Sunday, literally didn't exist the rest of the week. Whereas now kids are having treats nearly constantly. Daily is quite common. I was asked a few years ago to write a leaflet on lunchboxes, healthy eating for lunchboxes, and when I handed in the menu, the people that were asking me to do it, they're like, but you didn't put treats in the lunchbox. And I was like, they don't need them. We shouldn't be putting treats in lunchboxes every single day. So a lot of schools actually have policies around that, and it's great. And then they might have a treat on a Friday. But we've got to watch that, because if they have their treat on a Friday, that's one of their treats for the week. So then if they're having another. But what I'm seeing happening is kids during the week are getting biscuits every day, or they're getting the packet of crisps on the way home from school every day. And then there's a movie night on a Friday night. So there might be the popcorn and the crisps and the chocolate there. And then maybe they go out for dinner at the weekend, obviously not at the moment so much, but desserts. And then maybe there's a treat on a Sunday. And suddenly kids are having 4, 5, 6, 7 treats a week. And it's not about being mean to the kids that we take them away, but it's teeth, it's overall health and overall nutrition. And then, in an ideal world, things like chicken nuggets, chips, pizza, those kind of foods, just down. Now, pizza itself isn't the end of the world because it is bread, it's tomato sauce, and it's cheese and whatever toppings. The problem with pizza is the amount. And that's where we see this huge issues with it more than anything else. And the recommendations are really just no fizzy drinks. Or if they are, they're coming in as sort of one treat in the week. And again, particularly for younger children, small amounts, but really we want children just staying away from the fizzy drinks as much as possible. Both for teeth, but also because when we drink fizzy drinks, the body actually has difficulty sort of registering the calories that come in for that. So we do see kids who take, fizzy drinks regularly are a little more likely to be overweight than kids who don't. So look, you don't have control over them for very long. When they hit teenage years, we want to make sure that they're not in a habit of having treats every day and they're not in a habit of having soft drinks all the time. So you hope as teenagers that they might keep following some of those good ground rules that you've put in. The other thing in terms of treats is the size. And I remember when these guidelines came out there a few years ago, it was all over radio stations and newspapers going, oh my God, how crazy are these guidelines? These are so tiny. And people were giving out yards about them. And I thought, isn't it scary that we've actually got to the stage where we really think kids need a whole big bar of chocolate? Whereas actually 1, maybe 2 squares of chocolate for over kids, absolutely loads. 5 crisps, and I'm not kidding, really just keep the amounts down. So half a plain biscuit. And I know a lot of you listening are going, that sounds like utter madness. But that tells us how many treats our kids are getting, that we actually think that they're ludicrous. We're thinking of just how many treats kids are getting compared to what their bodies can actually handle. And we see a lot of child obesity coming up, and there's lots of reasons for it, but the increase in treats and snacking and stuff would be big factors in there. So just for yourself, think about the amounts, how often you give kids treats, but also how much you give them. And I'd often say, particularly for younger children, they don't know any different. You know what I mean? If you give a 3-year-old a square of chocolate, like they don't know that there's bars of chocolate out there. And again, what I've seen over the last 20 years is, when I was a kid, if you got a bar of chocolate, it was kind of the little standard 50-gram bar of chocolate. These days, that looks mean and small because we have these giant bars. So people visiting kids are bringing these massive bars of chocolate. And, it's just kids are eating them, they're overwhelmed with it. So don't be afraid, a little bit on the smaller and just giving them small amounts. If you really feel that you need to give them treats, I don't think there's a problem giving them a treat now and again. I think it's good for kids to learn about treat foods as part of normal eating, but just not every day as part of normal eating. They should be a thing just sort of now and again with it. So what if my child is gaining too much weight? So, with kids, we sometimes have kids who are underweight, particularly with celiac. We often have a lot of kids coming in who are underweight, normal weight, and then we have kids that can be overweight as well. And parents can be really nervous about tackling this, and I don't blame them. We hear so much about eating disorders today that we're absolutely terrified that, what if I say something to my kids about weight? What if I do something about it? Am I going to end up with them as a teenager, with anorexia or bulimia or anything like that? So yeah, we need to handle it with a little bit of care, a little bit of sensitivity with it. So the first thing I say to parents that often they'll come into me on their own without the kid. And I'll say to them, look, you don't need to tell the child they're overweight. Like a lot of kids are unaware until they get into sort of teenage years. A lot of them don't really notice if they have a bit of weight on. Some do, some don't. But you don't need to sit a child down and go, you are overweight and we need to do something. You just say nothing. But what you will do is look at what's going on in the house. So the first thing we would say is that usually if there's one child in the family overweight, there's usually other kids, even if they're not overweight, they're creeping up, or maybe mum and dad have a bit of weight on. So what you do is the whole family kind of will make some changes. Now, they don't have to be big dramatic changes, but what you might do is sort of sit back and go, hang on, okay, my child or my kids are gaining a bit of weight. So look, how often are the treat foods coming in? Can I start to limit those? How often are they snacking in between meals? Can I limit that as well? And what you do really with children as well is you nearly let them grow into their weight. Now, it depends on where their weight is. If you have a child that really has a substantial amount of weight on, sometimes we do need to just do a bit of work on that. But if you have a bit of weight on, there's a bit of a belly coming onto it, their height, as they grow, we just want them to grow into that weight. So it's not that we need to put them on sort of big strict diets and things like that. But what I would say is that you don't take one child and exercise them. You get all the kids out and mum and dad out as well, and all of that. So, and if treats are going down, they're going down for everybody, including the parents. And I do have kids and they go and check the bin to see that mum and dad are eating crisps when the kids gone to bed last night. So, it's a little bit of kind of saying, look, everybody needs to reduce the treats because it stops the child being singled out. And that's your thing in terms of eating disorders and so on. The movement is the big thing as well, because we do see, unfortunately, a drop in movement for kids. And screen time is a massive issue because kids sitting in front of a screen, whether they're doing video games or watching television or on the computer, they are just sitting. They're not even moving around. So really important to get screen time down to 30 minutes a day. And look, I have 2 kids. I have the constant battles around screen time. My friends are on and I want to join in with them. And look, there's all of that. But it's important to have a couple of ground rules. And I know certain, my kids are a little bit older, so we were kind of had the chat and they were kind of going, look, they'd rather not have it Monday to Thursday and have a little bit longer with their friends on the weekend. And that's how we work it. But look, you have to see what works for your family. If you have kids who end up 2-3 hours a day on screen, which is actually very common, and it's very easy for it to happen because you know yourself, if your kids are quiet, they don't interrupt you, they're not fighting, you're like, you don't notice. So I'd always say put on a timer. So put a little, if you have a timer on your phone, when they start on screen time, pop it on, because otherwise you can end up distracted and doing something and suddenly they're 2 hours on, because you'd be amazed the amount of kids who won't take themselves off screen after 30 minutes. So just wean it down. Children do need 60 minutes of exercise a day, and they need breathing faster exercise a day. It doesn't have to be all together. And I know on a busy day, and you have school, and then you come home, and then there's homework, and then you're trying to get dinner done, and then maybe there's other activities. So if you have a kid who's going out and doing football training or camogie training, or they're playing hockey or whatever it is, brilliant, great. But if not, they still need to get out, do a bit of running around, throw a ball, kick a ball. If there's a trampoline, jump on the trampoline, jumping jacks around the garden, playing chasing games and tag with kids, particularly smaller ones. They get great crack out of that, and they love interacting with parents if you have time. So just trying to see what you can do. So as I said, even 15 minutes 4 times over the day can help. So just mess and seeing what you can do in terms of, can you get them to the park after school if you have time? What can be going on to get a little bit of activity in there for them as well. And that's the big one, because that's going to build a little muscle for them, but it's also really important for bone growth, muscle growth. It's not just about weight. Kids actually need that absolute minimum of 60 minutes just for their growth. I often put this title up, The Famine is Coming, because I find when it comes to portion sizes in Ireland, we are terrified of going hungry. And I often think we're still eating based on the sort of the famine 150 years ago. So we tend, if you look at how particularly Irish people eat, is that we tend to go for big portions, and we tend to eat as much as we can when food is available. People at buffets, I often say there's a reason in Ireland there's very few all-you-can-eat buffets in Ireland, because I don't think anyone could afford it, because a lot of us would just keep going. So we also never miss an opportunity to eat. So food is available, we tend to go for it. And as I said, we really like the big plate, I often think, I've worked with so many people over the years, and I think we nearly don't care what the food tastes like, as long as there's plenty of it. And we need to just step back a little bit from that. So, from a cultural point of view, and not just in Ireland, it's unusual for people to consistently have really good levels of food. And I'm talking historically, like it's normal for humanity to go back over to be times of famine, hungry times, all of that in the year. So when you had food, it was really good to stuff in as much as you can when you could. But today, most of us are in the very fortunate position where actually we have enough food available all the time. We no longer need to be panic eating, but we also tend to pass that on to our kids. So I know a lot of parents and kids, you have to clear the plate. And I'd say, let that one go. Because, once the kid has eaten a really, little bit of everything on their plate, if they're feeling full, just stop. Because when you feel a bit full, that is your body actually telling you you've had the right amount of food. And it's great actually for adults as well. If as an adult you're struggling with your weight a bit, it's worth noticing where in the meal you actually start to feel a bit full and sort of go from there. So if a child is kind of, if they sat down with a good appetite, ate, and then they're sort of slowing down and then like, oh, actually I'm full, try and just say, look, that's fine. Rather than, no, you must finish that and there's only a mouthful, you've got to eat it and all the rest, stop. The other thing is, you'd better eat that now, you might be hungry later. And that's a real Irish thing. So I say, will you just stop? If you get hungry later, you can eat something else. With kids, I know there's a little bit of fussy eating where sometimes you just leave them and let them go hungry. The odd time is fine, but don't be sort of forcing kids to clear a plate or forcing kids to eat something in case they're hungry later, in the sense of, if they're not finishing every bit of their lunch, it's okay if they're kind of starting to feel full. There will be dinner, there will be a snack somewhere. It's not that they're actually going to starve to death if they don't eat it now. The other thing is we do tend to praise kids who eat a lot. You'll hear, oh, geez, he's a great eater, she's a great eater, they eat loads. And I always remember, talking to, we'd be doing groups around sort of weight loss and stuff. And I remember one parent saying to me, oh, they had a child who was quite overweight, and they were, getting some help for him. And but as we're chatting, and they were saying, he's a great eater now, he eats the same dinner I do. And this is, the parent. So if the child is eating the same dinner as the parent, that's not a good thing. It's too much food for a lot, but we're proud of that, like great eater. And of course, if you have a fussy eater, you'd be dying for a child who actually sits down and eats. But we need to just watch amounts for kids. So watch that a little bit as well. And what about sugar? So we hear so much about sugar, but actually sugar levels are falling in kids and have been for years. Now we do still need to keep an eye on it, but the big places to keep an eye on for sugar is sweets, biscuits, cakes, sugar-coated cereals, those kind of things that are really, really high. And soft drinks in particular are going to be a big place where we see kids picking up sugar with that. So really just limiting the soft drinks makes a huge difference. So as I said, we're talking about sweets, biscuits, cakes once or twice a week, not an everyday thing. And immediately you're going to get your sugar down from that. What's very important is that you do not need to worry about the sugar in foods like fruit, milk, and plain yogurt. Okay, absolutely. They're not the sugars that we talk about reducing. When we talk about sort of limiting sugar, we're talking about added sugars. So, where sugar has been added into biscuits, added into cakes, added into soft drinks, added into cereals, that's your added sugar. Or if you put, if you sprinkle sugar over cereal or you put it into your coffee, that's your added sugar. But the sugar that naturally turns up in fruit hasn't been added. Sugar that naturally turns up in milk hasn't been added. So it's really the added sugar to worry about, because I do see lots of parents getting nervous about things like fruit and yogurt for sugar. As I said, with the yogurt for kids, the plain yogurt and a fruit yogurt, absolutely fine for kids. They're fine. It's just the really sugary chocolate caramel things that are a problem. In terms of fruit juice, to be honest, dilute it till they're about 5. But a small glass of fruit juice per day is okay, but it's like a small glass, 150 mils, like just a little glass of fruit juice if they want to, but you certainly don't have to. The other thing where I see lots of confusion is people talking about, natural healthy alternatives to sugar. And the trouble is that a lot of them are actually sugar. So you're just swapping one kind of sugar for often a more expensive type of sugar, but it's all just sugar and it still needs to be limited. So remember, if you're adding it, it's an added sugar, no matter where it comes from. So honey is an added sugar. And if you're giving that to kids, you still need to count it in this 5 teaspoons of sugar a day. Same for things like coconut sugar, if you're using those, same, limiting to 5 teaspoons a day. Date sugar, maple syrup, molasses, all of those. Stevia doesn't have sugar, it's a flavor, but it's not something we're going to be giving to kids in huge amount. But it's just, I see parents and they're like, oh, well, I make the muffins now with agave syrup, and you're going, it's still sugar. You know what I mean? So if you're adding it, it's added sugar. So that is still their muffin once a week rather than every day. The other thing is with kids who are struggling with weight, and for adults, is a high fiber diet is brilliant for helping kids to manage weight. We know that people who eat a lot of fiber find it much, much easier to manage their weight compared to people who don't. So as much as possible, you're looking for whole grain where you can. So gluten-free cereals, gluten-free breakfast cereals, the gluten-free oats are great ways to get some fiber in the mornings. Adding, as I said, things like nuts and seeds are not just for iron, but they're brilliant for fiber. And I would do that a lot in the Celiac Society. We have a clinic, and if we have kids who are kind of really struggling with constipation, we get some of the ground seeds into yogurts or into cereals, and they're brilliant. Particularly things like flaxseed and linseed are great. Adding more fruit and vegetables is obviously going to give some more fiber. Beans and lentils are fantastic for fiber. And then in terms of breads, going for whole grain breads. If you're celiac, obviously you're on the gluten-free bread as well. And then even trying the odd vegetarian meal that are based on beans and lentils. And there's fantastic recipes online for, different things to do with beans and lentils that you could try with kids. Balancing out plates is going to be important as well. So for kids and for adults, you want a third to a half of the plate, salad or vegetables. And that can be a bowl of vegetable soup at lunchtime. It can be a side salad. It can be, stir-fried veg. It can be the veg in your stew, whatever it is. But looking at a plate, a third to a half of that veg or salad, about a quarter of it is the protein. Now for an adult, bigger plate, child, smaller plate, but still that quarter. So that's, fish, meat, beans, things like that. And then the carbohydrate is around a quarter of the meal. And this is the one to watch, because what I see is lots of kids who are just getting a bowl of pasta for dinner, and they might get butter on that or a bit of tomato sauce on it, but it ends up that the whole plate is pasta, whereas pasta should only be around kind of a quarter, maybe a third of the plate. with that, and then the protein, and then the veg as well. So it's just sometimes to keep an eye on that. Even with things like rice, we tend to cover the whole rice or whole plate with rice and sort of put the rest of the dinner on top, whereas a little bit of rice on the side, you know, the curry is here, and, you know, plenty of vegetables. Maybe they're in the chicken curry, maybe you've done some broccoli or something on the side. So just to kind of balance that plate out for the kids as well. So just some ground rules in general for healthy eating and for sort of, even if they're struggling with weight, is just do set some times for meals and snacks. Now, it doesn't have to be rigid, but particularly even on weekends, it's good to know, well, breakfast is, I don't know, 8 o'clock, lunch is 1 o'clock, dinner is 6. So the snacks are, you know, 11 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and that's it. Because then if they come outside those times, they, oh, can I have? You're like, no, just hang on, and they'll be okay if they're hungry for a bit. Now, if that's normally how you run things, they are going to resist for the first time. I will tell you, the younger they are, the quicker they get over it. But your kids hitting 8, 9, 10, you're looking at probably 2 months before they actually stop pestering you with it. But it's just that what I see lots of kids is they're grazing. They're grazing all day long. It's a biscuit here, and it's a piece of fruit there, and it's a rice cake somewhere else. And suddenly they've had 15 snacks in the day, and I see that. So just watch it. There's 2 snacks a day. Have a rough time for them. And then outside of that, they will learn eventually to stop asking. So that's nibbling from parents' meals. I see that a lot. So if you have kids who have their dinner, say, before you come home, and then they're having dinner with you again, it's another snack in the day. So keep an eye on that, particularly from a weight point of view. A couple of things: don't pile plates with food. So back to just the smaller plate. We're not going to force kids to clear the plate. We're going to try and get them slow down, because slowing down just gives their body a chance to register what's coming in. If you can't, try and eat as a family, because kids learn from watching you. They learn from you eating slowly. They learn from you not always forcing yourself to clear the plate. They learn from you eating your vegetables. So that kind of seeing that as a normal thing, and particularly an adult thing to do, can actually be very, very helpful. I have to try to avoid rows at meal times. That one's easier said than done, especially have a fussy eater. But fighting with kids over food is it's kind of counterproductive. It tends not to work with it. Easier said than done if you have a big fussy eater, but it's one just to limit. We want meals to be something pleasant the kids sit down to, that they enjoy the social side of food and all the rest. And actually that can help them in terms of good eating habits. So other things we can do with kids in terms of getting variety into their diets is, as I said, eating with them is brilliant. Letting them eat with other children that eat foods as well. I know we can be a bit limited in terms of COVID and stuff at the moment, but when you can, kids will often eat something that another child eats that you couldn't get them to eat in a million years. Getting them to cook can be brilliant, that they are getting into touching food, smelling food. They learn a lot of new foods with that. And the cooking doesn't always have to be baking. Parents are great for baking the cakes and the muffins and all the rest with kids, but get them into cooking sort of savory food. Teach them how to make scrambled eggs. Teach them how to put a salad together. And kids like to do that. And yeah, it takes 10 times longer the first time you do it. But if you keep doing that, you end up with kids who actually have learned that incredibly important life skill of being able to cook. So it means that when they do leave home, they're not relying on the ready meals. They actually know how to put a meal together. But it gets them interested in food as well. And growing food can be brilliant. And things like herbs, even on a windowsill in the kitchen, that can be really good, because you're really connecting them with food in a nice way. If you're having a real problem, you can look for a CORU registered dietitian, so coru.ie, or you can go to sedi.ie, which is a list of dietitians, or you can ask your GP to be referred into a HSC dietitian. So there is help out there. Just make sure you get a registered nutrition professional, because not everybody who kind of talks about nutrition has really studied it in good detail. And I do unfortunately see kids coming into our clinic who've been just randomly taken off dairy, or, all sugar is banned, or fruit has been reduced. So you just need to make sure, if someone, particularly for kids, get proper advice in terms of your nutrition. So that's everything that I wanted to cover with you today. And just to let you know, we have an Instagram page, so you can follow us there at Celiac Ireland. And if you're not a member, you can become a member at celiac.ie. And we just have huge benefits for members with this. So feel absolutely free to join us. I see we have a few questions here in the chat, so I'm going to just have a look through this. I'm going to pop up while I'm going through these questions that we do have. Stop our share here. We have a couple of polls just to have a look at the end. I think Jennifer is there. Jennifer, you might pop up that poll for me and people can click on it while I'm chatting about the questions. So let's have a look. So if you put spinach in a spaghetti bolognese, does it lose its nutrition value? It absolutely does not. So you can cook your spinach, fire away with it. The iron is going to stay there. So absolutely put it in your bolognese. God, I think that's a good idea. I haven't tried that. But yeah, throw that in. That's going to work really well. I wanted to know, do you do private work? I have a 16-year-old. So I do a clinic with the Celiac Society. Now it's really targeted on celiac disease. So if it's not that, and you're saying they're 16, I could highly recommend the Dublin Nutrition Centre. Is very, very good for working with teens, and their website is dnc.ie, and they're fantastic for that. But if you think you might like to see us, if you email me in, so if you email info@celiac.ie and just give me a bit more details, I might see if it's something that I can work with for you as well. So is 200 mils of milk one serving for a child? Yes. It doesn't count as 3 servings. So 200 mils of milk is 1 serving. Then they would need a yogurt and some cheese, or 2 glasses of milk and a cheese, or something like that. So it's part of the 3. At what point can you suspect celiac disease? Both parents gluten-free celiac, baby only beginning food journey at 7.5 months old. So if both parents are celiac, the baby is a little bit more likely to be celiac. So they have a 1 in 10 chance of being celiac as well. So what I would say to you is, once you start weaning and start giving them foods with gluten, what you're going to do is you're going to just see, is there a change in nappies? Do they start getting a bit more diarrhea? Or they start getting more constipated? Are they starting to get a bit more bloating? Are they a bit fussy and uncomfortable? Are they starting to go off their foods? There are things that you might take a look at. The important thing, though, and it sounds really counterintuitive, is don't take them off the gluten. Go to the doctor, get referred into a pediatric gastroenterologist, and do insist on that, because they need to be properly checked out by an expert with that. So there's no point doing a blood test on a baby, because the blood test for celiac disease isn't accurate in children under 3. But if the baby has no symptoms, and if your baby is still growing nicely and they're in good form, even though you're giving them sort of the bread and the pasta and things like that, and that's actually working okay, then that's actually going to probably, they're okay with that. But what we do recommend from the research that's out there is that, particularly if one or both parent is celiac, that we are going to check those children at age 3, age 6 and age 9. Even if they don't have any symptoms, we'll just do a quick check. And if at any time they suddenly slow down in their growth, or they're starting to get some tummy issues, or they're just not themselves, that's a time just to check in again anyway as well. I give my child 1 treat a day after she finishes her dinner. How can I reduce that now to 1 or 2 per week? Should I do it gradually? Yes. You're absolutely right. She's not going to be happy when you do it. Now, sometimes, I don't say it was fussy eaters, sometimes you need a bit of bribery to get them going. So if that's what's going on there, what I've sometimes done with parents is actually just say to the kids, I forgot to buy them. It's actually fine. You go, God, you just never thought of buying that at the supermarket. I completely forgot. And the child will be like, oh, well, what can I do? So you're not actually going, I'm not letting you have a treat. You're kind of going, oh, look, forgot, that's terrible. Or they didn't have them in the shop that day or whatever. And so you could go from, if it is every day, maybe bring it down to 5 days a week, do that for a little while, bring it down to 4, down to 3. Kids get used to it. You don't say how old they are, but the younger they are, the quicker they kind of actually get into it. If you just go, forgot, that's terrible. And I find that actually works really quite well. Now. So I add spinach to my meals chopped up, but as soon as my daughter sees anything green, she starts picking it out. What can I do? Sometimes what to do there is you might just pop it up on the side of the plate and let her get used to it. Now, what you will find, some kids are what we call super tasters. And if you're a super taster, and that's actually 1 in 4 kids, green vegetables taste really, really bitter to them. They're really bitter. So it's a very strong taste to particularly younger kids. So sometimes if that's her, I'd stop fighting with her on the green veg. And how you'll know she's a super taster rather than a fussy eater is if she actually eats lots of other veg. If she eats sweeter veg like sweet corn, carrots, things like that, and there's no problem with texture in other foods, but it's just the green veg, or if she really doesn't like citric things like lemon, sour, vinegar, things like that, she might just be a super taster. And if that's the case, I actually wouldn't fight with her over the spinach. I'd look for other foods with iron, or just give her other vegetables if she'd eat them. So kind of see how you go with that. It might just be that with it. Sometimes I'd kind of just keep giving it to them. Eventually, when they get a bit older, they get fed up picking it out and they might just eat it anyway. Or you could try giving it a little bit on the side and see if just doing that regularly, she might just herself come to try it. So putting like a little bit on a side plate, like a really little bit on the side plate, saying nothing, just kind of putting it there. Because sometimes kids need to learn the look of the food and the smell of the food and touch it a little bit and things like that. But no comment, don't be forcing them to eat it, don't even say try it, let them just get used to it being beside them. And sometimes that familiarity can actually help with it. I used to blend vegetables into a pasta sauce, but my child won't eat it after smelling or tasting it. He knows it's there and there's no way of convincing him. He eats fruit, but almost never eats veg. How do I get veg into him? So yeah, I mean, if they absolutely don't like vegetables, that's what I was saying about putting a little bit on the side plate. So whatever veg you're having with your meal, give him his dinner, but put a little bit of the carrot or whatever it is on a side plate, just each time with the meal. And again, you're saying nothing. And usually what happens with kids is after about 5 times you've done that, they might touch the carrot. And after about 8 or 10 times, they might pick it up, they might smell it, they might put it on their lips. After about 10 to 16 goes, a lot of them will take a little nibble. But you say nothing. Even if they eat it, you say nothing. Even if they touch it, you say nothing. But you just keep doing it. So if you have kids who are like, oh my God, vegetables are evil, but you just put a little bit beside them every day, after a while, they kind of, it nearly just takes their resistance down. It becomes a bit normal. It becomes a little bit closer. And for about 80% of kids, they'll often try it after a while of doing that. It's not foolproof. And as I said, absolutely, you don't say anything. And that's the big thing, because sometimes you've had such rows with kids about vegetables and stuff like that, that there's just this whole battle going on. And just taking that whole battle out of it, I would say if he's eating fruit, fantastic, just give him the fruit and it's fine. But just try that in terms of small things you can do with it. And the other thing is getting him cooking. So even if he doesn't eat what he makes, the fact that he's touching the food and putting his hands on it and all the rest, particularly kids tend to lick their fingers when they're cooking. So they often get a little bit of the taste of it in without you making them do it. And again, that's just getting them used to the taste of it as well. Is frozen veg as good as fresh veg? Yes, absolutely. Just from a celiac point of view, a few years ago, we did have an issue where some manufacturers are putting a bit of flour into frozen fruit and veg to stop it from sticking together. So just, I'd always read the ingredients on your frozen veg just to make sure that's not happening. I haven't seen it in a few years now. It was an issue a few years ago, but that's the only one I'd watch out from sort of a gluten point of view with that. Now, I think that we have 2 more questions. Have I guidelines regarding ham and salami? So kind of less is better. So for kids, really just trying to have less of that. So if you were going to do it, I mean, the advice is just not to have any in real life, but you know, we all have kids, my kids eat ham. Really once or twice a week. Try not to be the ham sandwich every single day kind of thing with that. Someone else is asking me if homemade smoothies are okay. Yes, absolutely. They're fantastic. No problem with those at all. It's good with the smoothies if you can do them a little bit fruit and a little bit veg. So this is where spinach can go in quite well with the fruit. So no, they're absolutely fine as well. Okay, I think that is all of our questions. So has anybody else any other questions before we finish up? Does sugar content go up if it's in the smoothies? No. It doesn't magically produce more sugar. So if you've just put the fruit in and that, it's absolutely fine. Yeah, I hear people go, oh, smoothies are full of sugar, but it's the whole fruit. It's no difference to you having chewed it and swallowed it. So no, smoothies are absolutely fine. And just to remind you, do follow us on Instagram at Celiac Ireland, and do, you know, have a look on the website, celiac.ie, for more information on celiac disease. Another last question here, I think, is organic salmon better? From a nutrition point of view, there's no difference between ordinary salmon and organic salmon. It's really to do with how they're grown more than anything else. So to be honest, I wouldn't see a massive difference in it unless you just like it a little bit better, and that's going to be fine. Someone has asked me for a copy of the slides, but we're going to actually we've recorded this, so you'll be able to come on to the Celiac website and actually watch it and have a look there. So they will be available for you later. Okay, I think we will call it a day. Doesn't seem to be any more questions from anybody. Lovely comments in. Thank you everybody who enjoyed it and found it useful. Okay, I think we will leave it there. And so hopefully we might see you at the next one. We are going to do another webinar next week. So do check out on the Celiac website for that and find out. So take care. Bye-bye.